Good morning. Welcome to Inquisition Update. My name's Tom Press, and I'll be with you for the next hour. You're listening to FirstAmendmentRadio.net, and we're continuing our discussion of the book, The Footprints of the Jesuits by R.W. Thompson. And yesterday we concluded in a paragraph dealing with the conference at Poissy. This particular portion of the book is showing us how the Jesuits forcibly inserted themselves into France to oppose Protestantism that was gaining strength and popularity in France. France, a Roman Catholic country that had pretty much accepted the papacy as the head of the Roman Catholic Church, the spiritual head, but as a rule, kept the papacy out of their civil affairs. They did not accept the temporal power of the Pope, his power as King of Kings. And they demanded that church and state be separate. And the Jesuits were called in and to bring France to subservience to the papacy, both in spiritual things and in temporal things, and also to extirpate, annihilate, and persecute Protestants, and to recapture France solidly for the papacy. Now, we're talking about this Council of Poissy was an opportunity for the Protestants of France, who were tolerated in France and gaining ground. It was an opportunity for the Protestants to get together and publicly discuss their faith, and to show the French people that they were loyal to the French nation, loyal to the French government. They would fight in the wars and help protect the sovereignty of the nation and become good citizens of France, and that they ought to be tolerated and that they ought to be appreciated for what they provided for France. Now, beginning with the paragraph which we were reading yesterday on the program, if you're following along in your own copy of the book, we're in the last paragraph on page 106 of the book. Now, it says, these proceedings were soon followed by the National Council of the French Church at Poissy, to which, as we have seen, the Protestants had looked forward with so much anxiety or anxiousness, anticipating it as an occasion when they would be permitted to make known the reasons for their religious belief. Okay, it was an opportunity for evangelization, if nothing else. And the Protestants of France very much looked forward to this council at Poissy. And it says it was attended by the Queen Regent, the King, and the entire royal court, representing monarchical power. Okay, monarchical power is always threatened by the ascendancy of Protestantism in the nation. In Protestantism, the people have the liberty and the power to elect their own governments. The monarchical system is left over from the heydays of the papacy. Now, the monarchical power, the monarchical form of government, was that which controlled France at that time. And so here we have attending this Protestant meeting, the monarchy, who the Jesuits would love to increase their fear of the Protestant Reformation advancing and gaining authority and strength and popularity in France. Okay, it was attended by the Queen Regent, the King, and the entire royal court, representing monarchical power. It was attended by 5 cardinals, 40 archbishops and bishops, and numerous doctors in behalf of the Church, that is, the Roman Catholic Church. It was also attended by several Calvinist ministers. These are Protestant ministers representing that form of faith, the Protestant religion. And by Henry, King of Navarre, and the Prince of Condé, representing the Huguenots. These are French Calvinists. And the general Protestant sentiment in favor of religious liberty. So here we have two opposing sides, those supportive of religious liberty and Protestantism, and those of the papal system, the royal court and the king. Now it says such a body under ordinary circumstances might have enabled the Protestants to realize their hopes, at least to the extent of convincing the authorities of the government that they were loyal to it and obedient to all its commands, except in the single particular of desiring to be left free to follow their own consciences in the worship of God. But Lainez, the Jesuit general, was there too, to demand conformity to the requirements of the papacy and of his society, the Jesuit order, that no discussion should be tolerated, and that, quote-unquote, uninquiring obedience, absolute uninquiring obedience to authority should be exacted from all. So we have a real party wrecker here, and this Jesuit general, Lainez, walks into this conference much anticipated by the Protestants to demonstrate their loyalty to the country and simply ask for religious liberty to practice the Protestant faith and to live peacefully with Catholics. Lainez would have nothing to do with it. Okay? Lainez is designed from the very atomic level to be anti-Protestant and pro-monarchism, pro-papacy, and anti-Christ. All right? Now, to him, Lainez, the Jesuit general, and to his society, it was impossible to preserve the union of church and state without this. And if this were not done, he's talking about uninquiring obedience. Listen, if the people of France ever do away with uninquiring obedience to authority and place their allegiances in Christ and read the scriptures for themselves and gain a little individuality, the monarchy is toast. Okay? This idea of uninquiring obedience is relegated to the ash bin of history in France. Lainez will not tolerate this. The stakes are extremely high. From Lainez's point of view, if the Protestants win a hearing of the French people, all is lost. France is lost. This Jesuit general is extremely afraid of what influence the Protestants will have in France, and whether or not they will continue, whether or not France will continue to be a Roman Catholic country. Will they seek liberty, or will they concede to the old world order of uninquiring obedience to the Roman Catholic hierarchy? It says to him, to Lainez, and to his society, it was impossible to preserve the union of church and state without this. This is critical to the Jesuit order. The only form of government under which the papacy can survive is a union of church and state. Because the church must rely upon the state to impose its will upon the people. The Roman Catholic Church cannot control the people unless it controls the government that rules the people. Now, okay, that's the union of church and state. Wherever you see the union of church and state discussed and brought up in this country, pay particular attention to what side people are on and the reasoning behind their positions. And take it in the context of history. Take it in the context of the history that we're reading in this book. He says, to him and to his society it is impossible to preserve the union of church and state without this. That is, uninquiring obedience. And if this were not done, its joint monarchism would be endangered. In other words, the monarchism of the French government and the monarchism of the Jesuit order and the monarchism of the Roman Catholic papacy. Monarchism is always first endangered when Protestantism, those who enjoy the liberty of Christ, come to power. At all costs, Protestantism must be stopped in France. Okay? That's the goal of the Jesuit order. That's the goal that they set from the very beginning. Destroy Protestantism and everything that arrives out of or as a result of the Protestant Reformation. That's popular forms of government, governments of, by, and for the people. When the people have the power, the Pope is just a doddering old fool on a chair. Okay? When the people succumb to the monarchical form of government and uninquiring obedience, the papacy is the King of Kings and the Lord of Lords. Okay? Now, having beat that to death, but it needs to be repeated over and over and over because we're taught in this country, well, let's say we're not taught anything about the Jesuit order or the monarchical system and how it relates to the papacy. We're never taught that the Pope is the biblical, historical, and prophetic Antichrist, so we have to unlearn everything that we've learned in the public school system and in our so-called Protestant churches. We have to restore historical, Protestant, and biblical understanding. And it's a large task, and it requires much repetition. I hope my listeners don't get tired of the repetition. There's new listeners coming in all the time that have never heard these things before. Again, he says, to him and to his society, it was impossible to preserve the union of church and state without this, and if this were not done, its joint monarchism would be endangered. Accordingly, he took special pains to point out to the king and the queen mother, quote, the indecency and danger, unquote, of the free discussion of questions of religious faith by those who were disposed to defend Protestantism in such an assembly. Okay? No freedom of speech for these Protestants. Protestants must shut their mouths and let somebody else lead this conference at Poissy. We're not going to tolerate the Protestants talking about liberty in France when we require uninquiring obedience. That's what's taking place in France at this time. The Jesuit general came to this Protestant meeting. It says Dorignac, remember the historian, favorable to the Jesuits. Dorignac says that Lainez, the Jesuit general, was, quote, shocked and grieved by the fearful blasphemies which had fallen from the lips of one Peter Martyr, an apostate monk, unquote, who had ventured to express his opinions freely. Here's a Roman Catholic monk expressing his opinions. That just tells you how much influence Protestantism had in France, right? This is not to be tolerated in the Roman Catholic Church. A monk of a monastic order of the Roman Catholic Church expressing his own personal opinion? Can't happen. And Lainez, the Jesuit general, is incensed by it. And he says he considered it improper, excuse me, he considered it improper for any but theologians, that is, those whose minds had been already molded and fashioned to uninquiring obedience, to be present upon such occasions. Literally, Lainez is dictating who should be at this conference and who should not. And certainly no mere monk of the Roman Catholic Church, and certainly not if he's going to express his own personal opinions, especially if they're sympathetic toward Protestantism. All right. Lainez rebukes anybody in this conference that's not a theologian. And it says this rebuke offended the Queen Mother. Obviously, she was not a theologian. She was a politician, a consummate politician, and she knew whose hand to kiss, the Pope's. But she was offended by this remark by Lainez. It says the rebuke offended the Queen Mother, who withdrew from the council. But this did not disconcert the Jesuit general, who was not so easily turned from his purpose. He knew the character of Her Majesty thoroughly, and said to the Prince of Condé, quote, she is a great dissembler, unquote, believing, as he undoubtedly did, that whatsoever she might then do or say, he would, in the end, bring her into obedience to the Jesuit purposes. In other words, Lainez knew that though she were a very powerful politician in France, a great asset to the Jesuit general and to the Jesuit order in the war against Protestantism in France, even though she was offended by his comment, he knew she was like putty in his hand. And when it was all over, he would gather her back up under his wing, and together they would wage war against Protestantism in France. And let me tell you, they did. To the tune of 70,000, at least 70,000 Protestants floating down the river. The St. Bartholomew's Day Massacre. I hope my listeners will take the opportunity to study what the St. Bartholomew's Day Massacre was. He says, that in the end he would bring her into obedience to the Jesuit purposes. That is, persecution of Protestants and forcibly coercing the Gallican Catholics back under the temporal authority of the papacy. This is all about asserting the temporal power of the Pope in a country that had previously rejected the papacy's assertion of kingship. Now, he soon had convincing proof of his power, for the Queen, the King, and the nobles never afterwards appeared in the council, and the Jesuit general had the matter in his own hands. So they all left. The court of France left this conference, never to return. And that left Lainez, the Jesuit general, the Antichrist, the one who claims infallibility, the leader of the militia of the Pope, one-on-one with the Protestants. This is incredible history here, if we understand the scope and the importance of the import of it. He said he soon had convincing proof of his power, for the Queen and the King and the nobles never afterwards appeared in the council, and the Jesuit general had the matter in his own hands. Instead of bringing the conference to any practical results, nothing practical is going to happen at this council. Nothing practical, at least favorable in the least degree to the freedom of conscience. Lainez succeeded in causing it to contribute to measures having reference to the admission of the Jesuits into all parts of France. So in other words, he completely changed the very purpose for the council at Poissy. No longer was it an opportunity for Protestants to witness their faith and their loyalty to the French nation and the French government. No longer were the Protestants even allowed to speak. The royalty left the conference altogether, and it was just Lainez then. Had the pulpit, and he used the council at Poissy as a platform to launch an explanation why the Jesuits should be accepted into France. Okay, this is how the Jesuits operate. In every discussion, they control the substance of the discussion and the council. And not only here in the Council of Poissy, but the Council of Trent that is already convened in Rome. Trent. The Council of Trent has already been convened. Lainez is operating in France, and soon as this controversy is over, he's going to beat feet back to the Council of Trent, where he'll be represented in front of an ecumenical council. This is incredible what's taking place here. It says the Protestants were dismayed and the Jesuits were triumphant. Lainez then became the leader of the Orthodox party, and from that time commanded an influence which Loyola himself did not acquire. So not only did Lainez replace the founder of the Jesuit order as his successor, but he exceeded him in accomplishments. in this particular case. And it says, we shall see hereafter how far-reaching and controlling this influence was. After Lainez left the council at Poissy, flushed with triumph, he repaired at once to the General Council of Trent, which was then in session, as a special legate of the Pope, Pius IV, who had discovered in him such qualities as he supposed might become available in helping the sinking fortunes of the papacy. Okay, Pope Pius IV saw in Ignatius Loyola and his Jesuit general successor, Lainez, the salvation of the papacy. The papacy was a sinking ship. The Protestant Reformation was liberating all of Europe, including France. The Pope's bark was bubbling. It was sinking fast. And the Jesuits, the papacy was looking for anybody and everybody to help save the papacy from complete destruction. Now, this was the first appearance of a Jesuit general in such a body, an ecumenical council, or in other general ecclesiastical assemblages, and consequently dates the beginning of a new era in the history of the Roman Catholic Church. Christianity had prevailed for more than 1,500 years without the aid of such a society as the Jesuits. But as that wonderful organization had been conceived by the restless brain of Ignatius Loyola for the sole purpose of suppressing the Protestant Reformation and all of its enlightening influences, it was readily accepted by the papal authority as a valuable help after the Pope had given it his endorsement. Hence, Lainez was received by the Council of Trent with unusual manifestations of joy and enthusiasm. Okay? He's a rock star. Lainez, the Jesuit general, the militia for the Pope, is treated like a rock star at the Council of Trent. It says the prelates of the council had undoubtedly been notified of his success at Poissy in obtaining the mastery over Catherine de' Medici, and through her over the king and the court of France, as well as over the Protestants. He didn't only just have victory, he used their meeting, their council, to sell the Jesuits as the saviors of France. Completely took over the Congress. Now, preference was shown him over all the representatives of the ancient religious orders of the Roman Catholic Church. And when the latter complained about this, upon the ground that the Jesuit society was only of recent origin, the council decided against them on account of the important services which the Jesuits, by means of their compact organization, would be able to render the cause of the papacy. So here we have represented at the Council of Trent the Franciscans, the Dominicans, and all the monastic orders, the ancient monastic orders of the Roman Catholic Church. And they can't understand why Ignatius Loyola, or rather Lainez, the brand new Jesuit general of this brand new monastic order called the Jesuits, is treated like a rock star. They're the new kids on the block. And it upset the monastic order, and the other monastic orders of the Roman Catholic Church have a nuclear hatred for the Jesuit order for this very purpose. We've come up on the break. We'll be back right after the messages. You're listening to Inquisition Update on FirstAmendmentRadio.com.
Years ahead of the dominant media, FirstAmendmentRadio.com and FirstAmendmentRadio.net.
I know you all want answers, and believe me, so do I, and I'll do my best to get them.
Have you seen the Left Behind movies? Have you read the Left Behind fictional book series? Not everyone believes Left Behind is true prophecy. Some may even regard as conspiratorial the mainstream re-release of the Left Behind movie, with actor Nicolas Cage portraying the main character, as an attempt to further reinforce in the minds of all this perception of false prophecy, in order to condition the masses for the play about to begin. Because they see the world stage shaping to fulfill what they have been led to believe is sound biblical interpretation, a left behind rapture scenario, this false view of prophecy is reinforced in the mind, not only of its adherents, but also includes those who have been merely exposed to the specific media. Is it possible that false prophecy can be fulfilled? The rapture theories have always been in dispute. Pre-trib, mid-trib, and post-trib disputes have risen up in exclusively evangelical circles of recent history, so that when true believers don't suddenly disappear, this element will easily go by the wayside when all see a new Jewish temple begin to be built. Will this be part of the great delusion that will come upon the whole earth? It seems that this great prophetic delusion has already overcome practically the entire American evangelical and Christian world. Get the book, The Rapture Will Be Canceled. To learn more, visit crosstheborder.org. That's CROSS, crosstheborder.org.
Record budget deficits, bankruptcies galore, and the U.S. dollar is at an all-time low. With today's gloomy economic outlook, safe investments are often hard to find. For over a decade, Melody Cedarstrom at Discount Gold and Silver Trading Company has been helping people secure their future by investing in the precious metals. Melody has the honesty, integrity, and experience that is often lacking in the precious metals business. Let her put it to work for you. Call Discount Gold and Silver Trading at 800-375-4188. That's 800-375-4188.
Welcome back from the break. You're listening to the second half hour of Inquisition Update on FirstAmendmentRadio.com. If you appreciate Inquisition Update, please support FirstAmendmentRadio.com, who sponsors the program. Now, we're back to our discussion of the Footprints of the Jesuits by R.W. Thompson. And Jesuit General Lainez has just smashed a grand slam home run for the Pope in France. And he returns to the Council of Trent, and they receive him like a rock star. And they are so patronizing of Lainez that it incenses the monastic orders who are also in attendance here at the Council of Trent. And it says, and to manifest this preference for the Jesuits over the other orders, so that it could not be mistaken. In other words, the Council of Trent is going to make a point directed smack dab in the face of the other monastic orders of the Roman Catholic Church in attendance at the Council of Trent. They erected a pulpit, especially for Lainez, and put it in a conspicuous place in the council chamber so that whatsoever he said should be distinctly heard. In other words, they gave him his own pulpit at the council, quite distinctly promoting Lainez, the Jesuit general at the Council of Trent. Now it says the monastic orders were not satisfied with the inferior position thus assigned to them, and they murmured, but could not help it. Such a reception as this, by so distinguished a body of prelates as the Council of Trent, was well calculated to incite the pride and the ambition of the Jesuits, especially of Lainez, and to create in their minds the belief that if they continued to pursue the cautious but aggressive policy of Ignatius Loyola, they would bring the Pope and all the ecclesiastical authorities of the Church into obedience to them. You see what R.W. Thompson is revealing here? That if the Jesuits continue on their successful course, they will eventually overrule the entire Church and the papacy. And is that not what we see today with the first Jesuit occupying the throne in Rome as Pope Francis I? It says, manifestly, the society considered this the ultimate end contemplated by Loyola, that is, taking over the papacy. And Lainez was sufficiently skilled in the methods of government to understand the necessity of obtaining from the Council of Trent the recognition of the superiority of the Jesuits over all the other monastic orders. He had not yet succeeded in accomplishing the admission of the society into France, and this he evidently regarded as an important step in that direction. Flattering as was his reception by the Council of Trent, it was not all he desired. He considered an additional step necessary to obtain from the Council a full approval of the reasons assigned by Ignatius Loyola to justify the establishment of his society. Accordingly, after the Council had passed upon the question of faith and dogma, as a matter of fact, just to let you know what R.W. Thompson is talking about here, the Council of Trent was convened to accomplish many things, and one of those was reform within the church. Okay, there was many internal problems that really led to the Protestant Reformation. Now, they accomplished this without destroying the papacy or the faith of the Roman Catholic Church. They conceded absolutely nothing to the Protestant Reformation. It was essentially a declaration of war is what it was, but they dealt with some issues within the church to make it more effective in defeating the Protestant Reformation. Okay, if you want to call that the reform of the Roman Catholic Church, that's what the Council of Trent, that's one of the reasons why the Council of Trent was convened. Now, it says, accordingly, after the Council had passed upon the question of faith and dogma, in other words, they just reasserted their ancient Antichrist teachings at the Council of Trent, it proceeded to investigate, quote, the causes of the evils which inflicted the church, unquote. Now we're going to go into a general discussion. Why is the papacy suffering? Why is Roman Catholicism suffering in Europe? Why is the papacy losing its power? And what can we do to arrest the flood of Catholics out of the church? And it says this opened an exceedingly broad field of inquiry and resulted doubtless, as Lainez desired, in the conclusion stated by Dorignac, quote, that these causes were principally the ignorance and the immorality of a great portion of the Roman Catholic clergy and the monastic orders, unquote, and that, quote, the best remedy for this great evil was to prepare Christian generations by a good system of education. Now, this is key, okay? That is to say that any effort to reform the existing clergy and ancient monastic orders would be unavailing, but that the remedy lay in educating other and future generations. So, to arrest all the evils that are threatening the Roman Catholic Church, which was brought about by the ignorance, the sinfulness, the debauchery, the absolute abject immorality of the papacy and the monastic orders of the Roman Catholic Church, can only be reformed if the Jesuits are given responsibility to educate all the youth of Europe and to replace these inept, immoral prelates of the Roman Catholic Church with Jesuitically trained upstarts. The Jesuits placed all of the emphasis upon educating a new generation of Roman Catholics that would eventually serve in the hierarchy of the Roman Catholic Church. Now this is, it's hard for me to even articulate how important it is for my listeners to comprehend the emphasis that the Jesuits place on education. Look, if the goal, as I assert, and as R.W. Thompson asserts, and as most of the authors that I read here on Inquisition Update assert, that the goal of the Jesuit order is to the destruction of Protestantism, the destruction of pure Bible-believing Christianity, and the elevation of the papacy to a global monarchical system, education is the only means by which this can be accomplished. And not just in Roman Catholic countries. No, this education must be heard by every man, woman, and child on the planet. If we're going to have a global union of church and state, if we're going to have a global monarch, then all of the children of the world are going to have to be slowly but surely inculcated or taught this monarchical teaching. And what do we see in the schools today? All this talk about globalism. Okay? The global village. It takes a village. On and on and on. They're making reference to the earth as simply a village. And what do you normally have in a village? You have a mayor, right? And he governs the village. Okay, and we're talking about global warming, and all the nations of the world must unite under a common effort to stop this global warming, as if God, who said, "Be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth," was so inept that he failed to provide enough energy to sustain that world of people, and relegate us to live in a CO2 enriched hothouse. That God made a mistake, and men have to stand up now and fix it. And what better man than that to accomplish that than the Christian, the Pope? Okay? You see, all of education has been twisted to deny Christ and to rely on men to solve the problems of the world. That's a global monarchy of men. A global monarchy that operates under the papacy. It takes education. First and foremost, you have to re-educate the world's people. So the Jesuits are going to be the sole educators on the planet. Now, if you're going to roll your eyes and say, "Oh, come on, Tom, you've gone too far this time. The Jesuits don't educate everybody." Well, they do, and R.W. Thompson's going to continue on this till, and you're going to have to accept this as truth. Because, look, the curriculum of our schools are not set by the localities. They're not set by the local school board. They're set by the government, by the federal government, or the Department of Education. And who controls Washington, D.C.? How come there are no Protestant Bibles in the libraries of the schools? And even if you homeschool, you have to accept a federally written curriculum for homeschooling. And they keep you so busy with secular education, there's no time for true Bible-believing Christian education. So they make sure that the truth is never heard in this country, not from the mainstream media, not from the schools, not from the universities, not from the seminaries, not from the Protestant churches, not from anywhere. You see how they control education? Look, if Protestantism were taught in the schools today, we would laugh at these globalists. We don't need a global government, for crying out loud. The God who made us, the God who saved us, divided the nations at the Tower of Babel. We're not supposed to be under the control of the volition of a single man, unless he be Christ Jesus. The nations are to be sovereign and independent. Common sense dictates that if God created the nations, they're to be sovereign and independent and separate. God divided the people. Who's taking the responsibility of uniting all the people now? the Jesuits, the Roman Catholic Church, uniting all the people, this global ecumenical movement. We need a human solution to the problems that they manufacture. One certain way to get everybody to obey you is to bring up this big boogeyman called global warming, and then convince the world that only they can fix this global warming problem. We've just completely forgotten what God said. He said, "Be fruitful and multiply, and fill the earth." Are we to believe that God was so inept that he failed to provide us protection from a world full of people and the waste produced by a world full of people? That's what the Roman Catholic Church would teach us. The biblical, historical, and prophetic Antichrist wants us all to believe that we must rely upon the papacy, or the black papacy, the Jesuit general, to solve the problems of the world. And it has to be through education. There's no Protestantism in the educational system. There's no Bibles in the churches. You're not allowed to pray. Oh, but the Muslims can. And the Catholics can. That's right, the Catholics do. They're the teachers. Okay? They're the superintendents and the principals of the church, of the schools. They make sure Rome's interests are protected in the schools. And that's to see to it that no Protestantism can rear its ugly head in the educational system of this country. Education is as much a part of the Counter-Reformation as the Jesuit general himself. And you wonder why the schools produce such ignorant children. Here's your answer. The dumbing down of America and the rest of the world is because the Jesuits are the great educators all over the world, not just here in America. Okay, the horse is dead. Let's move on. It says it is easy to see that this conclusion was unavoidable under the doctrine established by the same council and affirmed also by the Jesuits, that the clergy who led virtuous and those who led vicious lives possessed the same power and authority in the church. So Ignatius Loyola is going to reform the church. And how is he going to do that? By reforming the minds of everyone through education. Now it says this was a great triumph for Lainez and his society, the Jesuit order, inasmuch as it was a special approval by a specific approval by the Council of Trent of the grounds upon which Ignatius Loyola had justified the creation of the Jesuit Society, that is, the incompetency of the Roman Catholic Church to reform itself without extraneous aid, in other words, without the aid of the Jesuit order, apart from the existing clergy and the monastic orders, and the necessity for an educational organization like that of the Jesuits to be maintained by authority and discipline for that purpose. Now you know what the job of the Secretary of Education in this country is to impose Jesuitical curriculum. And it says, and thus equipped by so important an endorsement, the Jesuits at once assumed to have been constituted with divine approval the exclusive educators of the world, and to be endowed with authority to enter every nation at will, and so to train and discipline the quote-unquote Christian generations as to bring them down to a common level of obedience to the united authority of church and state. I'm going to read it again. I know you were listening carefully, but I'm going to read it again anyway. And thus equipped by so important an endorsement, the Jesuits at once assumed to have been constituted with divine approval the exclusive educators of the world, and to be endowed with authority to enter every nation at will, and so to train and discipline the quote-unquote Christian generations as to bring them down to a common level of obedience to the united authority of church and state. the universal educators of the world, to promote through education unquestioning obedience by the world's citizenry under the authority of a global union of church and state. Now, just go to the desk there and open up a newspaper and start reading it and see it for yourself. R.W. Thompson is telling us precisely what is happening in this world. And it's verifiable. You don't have to take my word for it. I've got no monopoly on good information. It's everywhere you look. All you need is just a little color on the canvas so you'll be able to distinguish the characters. Now you know who controls our education system. Now you know why our education system is so anti-Christ. Now you know why the politicians of Washington, D.C. don't answer to the people. They answer to somebody else. Anybody guess who that is? Can I see a show of hands? Anybody have a guess? Now you know why the President of the United States is not bound by the Constitution. And he doesn't have to answer to Congress. He can just issue orders by divine decree. Presidential directives. He's acting like a monarch. Why? Because it's a monarchical system now. The people don't have a voice. You've been reduced to a serf. Well, you've given up on your Protestantism. Individuality. A purposeful individual reading of the Scriptures, hoping and praying for the leading and teaching of the Holy Spirit like true Protestants do. No, we go to church every Sunday, check our brains and our Bibles and our coats at the door, come in, sit down, and listen to the globalists preach. And there's very little preaching today as well. Where's the gospel heard in the churches? You know what the gospel in the churches now is? Romans chapter 13. You must obey the legitimate authority of the state. This church is a 501c3 tax-exempt servant of the state. And you all have to be so loyal to your government as to repudiate your Christianity, because being loyal to your government is a divine service. All right? And if the government says you turn in your guns, that's what you're going to do. As a matter of fact, we're going to turn this church into a receivership for all your guns. We're going to consider it a Christian thing to do, to gather up all these killing machines that people use for hunting, and we're going to dump them all in the sea so that the government can rule and reign without opposition. You know, they got a saying in the gun lobby, you know, when they outlaw guns, only the outlaws will have guns. You know who the outlaws will be? The police and the military. Right? The ones that are the outlaws now, they serve the government. They don't serve the people. They're paid by the government, not by the people. They receive their paychecks from the government. They're not loyal to the people anymore. And when they're the only ones who carry guns, only criminals will have guns. The only legitimate authority of the civil power is to reward good and punish evil. That's right in your Bible. To reward good and punish evil. Now, how do we know what is good and what is evil? Well, the Bible tells us what is good and what is evil. The government doesn't have the right to rewrite the Bible. So the civil power is to govern according to God's law and reward those who obey God's law and punish those who don't. That is the legitimate authority of the government. But the government does not dictate to me what is good and what is evil, contrary to the Scripture. Now, if we serve under a godly government, we're to obey the higher power. But if our higher power is anti-Christ, we are to rebel. That's patriotism, rebelling against a godless government. But our preachers today teach a whole new gospel about Romans chapter 13. That good or bad, we are to be loyal to the king. Even if he's Satan himself, we're to be loyal to the king. You know who else teaches that idea? The Jesuit order. The Jesuit order teaches that if the superior general of the Jesuit order was Satan himself, every Jesuit would obey him unquestioningly. Instantaneously and without question obey Satan himself if he were the Jesuit general. Now, common sense dictates that there's something wrong with that thinking. So why should we apply that same type of corrupt thinking to our own government? What if the Jesuit general controls our government? What if Satan himself, through the Jesuit general, controls our government? Are we to obey the secular power? Are we to obey the earthly power? Who do we serve? Do we serve Christ or Antichrist? That's what it's boiled down to. It's a whole different picture now, isn't it? You know, there's such a thing as being so loyal and patriotic to your country as to be a sin. Well, most of America today is living eyeball deep in sin. Obeying a godless government. That's what we're doing. And we call it Christianity. We call it patriotism. Oh, we lament losing our rights, and we hate it that the government is becoming more autocratic and tyrannical, never stopping to think that we're serving an antichrist government. It's not a government anymore of the people, by the people and for the people. It's for the Pope. Monarchism. We've been taught from cradle to grave monarchism. And we better unlearn it quickly. That's it for today. We'll see you Monday back here on Inquisition Update. Thanks for listening.
Visit crosstheborder.org, CROSS, crosstheborder.org, to get your print, EPUB, or PDF version of the book, The Rapture Will Be Canceled. That's crosstheborder.org.
I know you all want answers, and believe me, so do I, and I'll do my best to get them.
Despite Nicolas Cage's promise to do his best to get left behind rapture answers for us, don't hold your breath. Not everyone believes Left Behind is true prophecy. Some may even regard as conspiratorial the mainstream re-release of the Left Behind movie with actor Nicolas Cage portraying the main character as an attempt to further reinforce in the minds of all this perception of false prophecy in order to condition the masses for the play about to begin. If you want true Bible prophecy answers, get the book, The Rapture Will Be Canceled. The author exposes the Latin rapture origin, the 7-year tribulation deception, true Bible revelation of Daniel's 70 weeks, the abomination of desolation, the restrainer, America in the Revelation, the image of the beast and the mark of the beast, and the truth about God's chosen people, and so much more about Bible prophecy. This book will shatter the left behind paradigm of future events. Get the book, The Rapture Will Be Canceled. Visit crosstheborder.org, CROSS, crosstheborder.org, to get your print, EPUB, or PDF version of the book, The Rapture Will Be Canceled. That's crosstheborder.org.